So what do we mean by the Upstander Ripple Effect?
Stand up against hate and prejudice, even if it does not affect you.
From moral dilemmas in today's headlines, upstanders who rose for justice, and stories of survival.
Be prepared to walk away from this conversation inspired and motivated.
I'm Jackie Congedo.
I'm Kevin Aldridge. Thanks for joining us.
We are here, episode 2. It is June at the time of this recording. And for us here at the Upstander Ripple Effect podcast, June is a really special month because this is the Cohen Family Upstander Month, where we shine a spotlight on the upstanders in our world, in our community, these everyday heroes who are using their strengths to really step in and make a change. And so we have some incredible upstander stories to share with you this month, coming out of our Upstander Awards and coming out of our pilot launch, and a lot of people sort of listening and offering their own stories as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how people continue to respond to what we put out here. And again, we look forward to your feedback. So tell us what you think about the Ripple Effect, the pilot episode, and it's just exciting stuff.
It is exciting. I feel like now that we're in, we're fully in episode 2. We were saying we're veterans now. We don't really need scripts. We're just gonna have a conversation here. So we'll be interested to hear your feedback on the first episode, and of course on what we talk about today, which is primarily going to be stories of upstanders in keeping with our theme of our Upstander Month. Before we get into that, we wanted to talk just a little bit about some things that are happening this month, going on in our world and in our community, and some reflections on that. So, to start, today is the day of this recording. It might not be the day that you're listening, but the day we're recording this is Juneteenth.
Yes.
And it's a special day to reflect and to think about the progress we've made and the progress that we still have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we ought to think about all of our national holidays in that respect, and I don't think that we often do. A lot of times we kind of look at these as days off and days to relax and recuperate from our jobs, but I think it's important for us to reflect on Juneteenth and other national holidays, just about how far we have come as a country. And how far yet we still need to go, and what we need to do to make sure that we continue to protect the freedoms and liberties that our forefathers and mothers, fought very hard for us to obtain.
Yeah, sometimes I think we get lulled into this idea of, the work's behind us, or here we are, and like you said, it's a day off. But I think days like today really remind us that progress is possible, but really it's because of intentionality and the work that we put in that these things happen. It's not predestined that we're going to continue to make progress on these things. We have to really dig in and do the work. And so celebrating all of the upstanders who are still doing the work today, who are writing the next chapter of civil rights across all identities, and really the future of our multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy, which is in a moment, having a moment, isn't it?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, it even harkens me back to Ben Franklin's quote about us having a democratic republic if we can keep it, right?
That's right, yes.
That very quote in its essence talks about that it's not something that's established and will exist forever, that the work has to be put in regularly for us to maintain what we've built, because there are always going to be forces who are going to test the boundaries of what we're trying to establish, test the boundaries of our freedoms and liberty. And if we want to protect those things for every American, that's a process that we have to be very diligent about every day. And, I often think about historical figures, and this getting back to our upstander focus, is that I often wonder if people in historical moments actually thought that they were going to be historical people, or if they were just people living in times trying to do things and make a difference. And so who knows, any of these upstanders that we talk about on this podcast, or even some who are flying under the radar, 50, 100 years from now could be viewed as significant historical figures who were just simply everyday people who were just moving through the day trying to make a difference. So
history will tell that,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And it's like, in the opening film in the museum, the challenge from survivors is you're going to be tempted as you read about this history and you learn about this history to think about what I would have done back then. And actually the answer to that question is, but what are you doing today?
Yes.
We're writing the history today.
Yeah.
And our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on will be reading and learning about the choices we made today. And sometimes I think like it's just because of the way we're wired, we don't always start there.
Yeah. Yeah. I often think about, and we'll probably get into this in some way, shape, or form as we get into some of our other discussions of current events. But, just in looking back on Black history, and I always think about people who are in these old black and white photographs who are either standing in places where they're protesting against, the integration of schools or people sitting at a lunch counter. And I wonder if those folks ever thought about being on the wrong side of history in terms of where they are. Because when we look at it in the modern context, those photos don't age well for those folks. And in fact, there are some people who are in prominent positions today. I think the Dallas Cowboys owner had to answer some questions about, him being in some of those photos from back in the day and why he was there and what he was thinking in those moments. So I think it's very important for us to understand, to your point, what are we doing today? Where are we at? Because at some point, we might find ourselves in some old picture 50 to 100 years from now being judged based on where we were, what we were doing, and what we were saying.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. I mean, it's not an easy task. I think it is really hard in the moment to try and have that perspective to be able to say, wait a minute, this is where I am right now, but, what is the legacy of this? Or what does it look like in 50 years or 100 years? Or, the other piece I know we wanted to talk about today is we're in the middle of Pride Month,
yes,
which is an awesome time in Cincinnati. It is such a amazingly, beautifully vibrant Pride scene, and so as people are celebrating, what's bubbling in some ways underneath and to the top are some real tough conversations about allyship. The fact that members of the Jewish community have been sort of made to feel, if it's fair to characterize it that way, as if they're not really wanted in their full identity. I think this started with it certainly didn't start. I think this is happening in different ways in different places, but there was sort of a watershed incident in Cincinnati where there were a number of members of the LGBTQ community who were in Covington for Northern Kentucky Pride, and they saw some folks who were there who were using rhetoric, or they had signage that indicated that Netanyahu, right, is the Prime Minister of Israel, is exacting the final solution against Palestinians. And, in the context of our work at the Holocaust Humanity Center, we know that language to mean something very specific, and that's a very specific reference, not just to genocide, but to the genocide of Jews in Germany, perpetrated by the Nazis and throughout Europe. And so that the use of that term is something that strikes a very deep, raw chord and has a very particular definition for Jews, I think, and actually for all of us. I think all of us hear final solution, and that's Hitler's Germany.
Right.
And so, the weaponization, in my opinion, of the trauma and sort of the inversion of that, I know has been terribly painful for the Jewish community. And, when these members of the Jewish community who are also part of the LGBTQIA community raised a concern about this, from what I know, organizers of Northern Kentucky Pride asked those folks who had those signs or were using that language to leave. But now what's happened is those two members of the Jewish community who raised their voices on this have been sort of ostracized in the Pride community, or among the Pride community. I don't want to speak in broad strokes here, but there's been enough, according to them, that's happened that's made them feel pretty unwelcome. And so we're now approaching our, again, as of the taping of this episode, our big Pride weekend in Cincinnati, and there's a lot of discussion and hurt in the Jewish community, and I'm sure in the LGBTQ community as well. And certainly we should talk about the fact that these are not mutually exclusive communities, right? There are people who hold these identities together, and certainly so painful for them, who are really struggling with how to participate and what to say and what to do. Thinking about, the Jewish Federation, and they're encouraging people to participate, I think, in whatever way they feel comfortable, but actually sharing that, if you're wearing something that outs you as a Jew, some insignia of your identity, you should know that you're more likely to be the target of harassment. So this is like very challenging times, and it's so sad to me that this is during a moment that should be about celebration of diversity, and pluralism, and LGBTQ pride, that this is where we are, and this is the conversation. Yeah.
Well, I think if you look at sort of where we've been, not just in the past few months, but, maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, we haven't really been able to kind of celebrate these sorts of occasions without some underlying political issue or social justice issue that's sort of permeating all of these celebrations. I mean, I think you touched on it. The interesting thing to me in this is, and I always try to think about these things from the human element, just sort of, removing the politics per se from the discussion. But if you are a member of the LGBTQ community who happens to be Jewish as well, and you talked about this intersectionality of identities where all of us are more than just one thing. You're Jewish, you're a woman, you're a mother, you're a redhead, right?
You.
Yeah, you've got a lot of different defining characteristics that make up who you are.
Right.
And in this time, if you're a Jewish person who's already feeling alone, or if you're a member of the LGBTQ community who, for a variety of different reasons, may not even be able to find solace within the Jewish community, now you're in a space where maybe the one area where you thought you had allyship and friendship, now your Jewishness is complicating even the factors of where you thought you might be able to find a safe space there. So how is that individual dealing with the challenges that are coming with what we're seeing here, and how alone must that individual feel, or unsafe that individual feels, and where you felt like maybe the one safe space that I might have might be within the LGBT community, and now I'm not even safe there because if I'm identifying myself as a Jewish person because of the politics of what's going on, I could even be under threat among people who I thought I would be the safest with. And it's just, my heart absolutely just goes out for folks who find themselves kind of trapped in that situation right now, because it's just not an easy space to occupy.
Yeah. And when I think about, looking for the upstanders, the people who are sitting at the intersections of this really painful situation are leading, let me just say, are in a position to, many of them are leading the way. They are, by insisting at all turns on people having to confront the humanity of both of these identities living in one human being. That's what changes things for people, is just being, again, confronted with this idea that, guess what? These identities are reconcilable, not just reconcilable, but they actually beautifully exist together inside me.
Yeah.
And so the more we can be in proximity with each other in that way, and we can understand those things, I think the more progress that we'll make. And again, I just think the secret to so many of these challenges that we're facing today is centering the humanity in the other person, just trying And sometimes that's really hard, right? Because it feels good to be grounded in your truth in a way that's very black and white, and in a way that sort of positions you as the, well, I have the moral high ground here. And the reality is that most of the time, particularly when you're talking about a space of allyship and, shared values, somebody else also has humanity in them, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we have to just confront that.
And this thought just came to me, so it could be completely stupid and ignorant.
Okay, I can't wait to hear
and
this.
I'm sure people will let me know about it if it is. But I think the one thing that kind of is really surprising to me, and as we talk about allyship, we're talking about communities who are minority communities,
Yeah.
many that have been put upon, discriminated against, who know the feeling of
Yes.
inhumanity. And you would think that we would have a better sense of how to come together and dialogue around differences, right? Because we know what it feels like to not be listened to not be heard. And so you would think that even within our disparate communities and experiences, that based on that, we would be able to come together and better hash out issues of difference. But what seems to me to be occurring is that the pain and trauma that we have all experienced in it creates a block where even though we know better, we still have that inability to be able to communicate effectively across that we can't get past the pain and the trauma to see that we know how to talk about these things. We know how to deal with them because we talk all the time about how we wish that other factors would be able to do that. But across these marginalized communities, we're unable to take those things and effectively have those conversations.
And make no mistake, that's what marginalization does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you're told you have this tiny little sliver of the pie and that's it, then it's like there is no abundance mentality. Right. There's no, can it possibly be true that you have an identity that comes with oppression, and I also have an identity that comes with oppression, and that in the cases of people, in the context of this conversation, who hold both identities, right? Who are gay and Jewish, or trans and Jewish, or that again, that's why I think that it's a heavy burden, and it's not all on these people who have both identities, but I think that the opportunity for leadership, particularly in those intersectional spaces right now, is so huge. Yeah. And so I'm just thinking about all my friends in the gay community, all my friends in the Jewish community, all my friends who live in both communities, and trying to send them lots of strength, and just that I see them in all their humanity in this moment, and hope that we can move through this in a way that gets us closer to a better spot. Yeah.
And that's the point, right? Like, that's the point of celebrating Pride Month and Juneteenth and all of the things that we talk about is trying to recognize and see people in the fullness of who they are.
Yep. The other piece that we're celebrating this month is our Upstanders in our Upstander Awards. Beginning of the month, we had an awesome,
fantastic event. I mean, it was beautifully put together, well done.
Oh, I wish I could take credit, but I'm giving a shout out to Kara Driscoll, who is our amazing director of marketing and events, and the team, really our whole team that pulled that off. It was a heavy lift, but I'm glad that it came across.
Yeah, I mean, even the creativity in overcoming the acoustical challenges of
headphones.
Being in the rotunda at Union Terminal, I thought was just very creative, very well put together.
No, thank you on behalf of our team. I mean, we it's such a special moment. I was just sharing with someone, I don't think I will ever tire of watching ordinary people be recognized in an extraordinary way, and in a way that's like a surprise in that moment. They don't know it's coming. It's like infectious, just seeing how they receive that and what it means to them. It's so deeply meaningful. There were so many tears on stage.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody a lot of people go out and do the work and they're not looking for any type of recognition or reward. But at the same time, it is still gratifying to know that other people see what you're doing and recognizing the value and the quality of what you're bringing to the community. And that's got to feel good. And like you know, seeing the smiles and the tears and the joy on people's faces and talking to some of the people in the aftermath of the award ceremony. Just kudos to them. Great job for them. And Cincinnati's very lucky to have so many dedicated, selfless individuals who are trying to make life better for a lot of people.
Yeah, and doing it without any expectation that anybody's going to say anything about it. So, you know, there were two stories from that we wanted to highlight here, and there were so many. I mean, we could talk the whole next hour and a half or whatever we're going to do here about these alone, but we're going to feature some conversations with some of our Upstander Award winners in future episodes, and so there will be more to come on this. But the ones I thought that were particularly sort of really impactful and relevant in this time or in this moment, so Lamont Reagan, who is volunteers with La Soup. He was actually nominated by, I think, Susie DeYoung at La Soup, and he has built from his own really experience of growing up in a place where he saw proximately that having access to after school activities and sports and rec was hard for a segment of kids in our community and including him. And so he decided, I'm going to do something about that. And he built this nonprofit where he has after school sports and rec activities for kids. And he knew that for himself, it was actually the opportunity to dig deeper in learning that helped him advance. And so as a condition of participating in these free after school activities, you have to do some tutoring. And so he's built this whole incentive model, and he's got such warmth and, you know, just the experience of having been there himself. What an incredible guy. And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
We recognized him this month in the awards, and it was really special. And I was thinking about him because of what's going on and right now in Madisonville with the aftermath of this horrific shooting at Bramble Park, where 5 people were shot. And, you know, police coming out and saying, you know, we're doing what we can, but we need help in the neighborhood. And, you know, it's on all of us to try and figure out how to create spaces where violence isn't acceptable, or where we can, you know, that provide some level of bubble of immunity to these kinds of things. And Lamont is doing it. I mean, I read that story. I thought, wow, well, have they met Lamont Reagan? He's doing this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are a lot of Lamonts in Cincinnati who are trying to do things to give kids opportunities to do other things or to be involved with things. The challenge is that they're never enough, right? Like there are way more kids that need mentors, that need, you know, positive opportunities than there are Lamonts out there who are doing it. I think, and I always feel it necessary to say this when it comes to the violence, and I think the police would co-sign on this, is that, you know, we are talking about a very small percentage of individuals who are wreaking a lot of havoc. You know, like this is not not to diminish the problem. It's a serious problem, but is not as pervasive in terms of the number of people who are involved in actual committing the violence. In fact, there are far more of the kids that we are talking about who are traumatized by these individuals.
And this was a family reunion.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just a bunch of people who are gathered together to like celebrate and have a good weekend, and one actor, I think. I mean, I haven't read, you know, the follow-ups on it, but a small group or one actor came in and disrupted that whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the way that it is in most cases, but a lot of times it gets broadly painted as, you know, this is a huge community-wide issue. So I think it's necessary to say that you've got a very small percentage of people who are creating a whole lot of problems. But getting back to that, I do think there is still this element of we do need to have more things and more things that our younger people can be involved in and be a part of, because a lot of what leads even that small percentage of people to that activity is not having a sense of belonging or being a part of something.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids wind up in gangs and in other things because they're looking for love. They're looking for a sense
community.
of belonging
Yeah,
and community, and that is what's around them, and that's what they see, and that's what they fall into. I think if you talk to a lot of kids, if you live in an area where gang activity is prevalent, sometimes you don't have a choice. Like,
That's
becoming a part of that lifestyle is what you have to do to be able to survive, to even walk to school, safely is to be a part of that. And so it's never as cut and dry as we think, but I do think programs like what Lamont is doing are critical. One of the things that kept me on the straight and narrow, aside from having two really good parents, was sports was a big part of my development. And sports exposed me to so many different things. It taught me so many different life lessons: how to deal with the success, how to deal with adversity, how to deal with competition. There are so many good things that kids learn from sports. And we know, with funding being the way that it is in public schools, and sometimes now you have to pay to play in sports. And if you're coming from a tough situation where you're coming from a low income household, you might not be able to afford to play sports in some of these places. And so having access to free activities like that can keep kids involved, make them a part of a team, have mentorship and tutoring being provided there. I can remember we had tutoring when I played basketball, and study hall after school where we had to go in. So there's structure that comes from that type of programming that can be very good for helping to keep kids out of things that might not be so positive. They say, idle hands are the devil's workshop, so to speak. And so there is a big component to this problem of having more positive options for kids to take part of. And the free part is a key piece to that, because knowing some of the challenges that we have with poverty here in Cincinnati, these have got to be options that are available to kids that they can participate in at no cost. And that's a key piece to it. So hats off to Lamont.
Yeah, he's incredible, and is out there just, I'm sure, today doing the work, without any expectation of recognition. So it was really special to be able to celebrate him at the Upstander Awards. I was thinking about what you said, the power of education, and the fact that, if you believe that every person is inherently equal and good, then what's the gap? Like, why do some of us make certain choices and others make other choices? And I firmly believe it is about education.
Sure.
And about just access and exposure, right? Which is in itself sort of different forms of education, liberally interpreted.
For sure.
I was thinking about this other story with another, it was actually two women who won another one of the Upstander Awards. The Erwin Hurley Award for Perspective was given to Beth Silvers and Sarah Stewart Holland of the Pantsuit Politics podcast. And these are two women who have different political sort of leanings, and they have launched this conversation podcast series where they tackle really tough issues from very different perspectives and sort of model this way that's grounded in perspective, perspective, your own perspectives, but understanding that there are other perspectives out there, and perspectives that are grounded in humanity that can be different. And the reason I was talking about education here is because something really special happened at the Upstander Awards when Beth and Sarah, it was actually Beth, I believe, who was there to receive it. Sarah couldn't be there. But Beth went up on stage, and we had Erwin Hurley, who was an officer in World War II. His son, Dan Hurley, who we know from news, who's done so much amazing work in our community outside of his time in television. But so Dan and his sister were on stage to present the award, and Dan brought a copy of a letter that his father wrote to his mother while he was serving at the end of the war. And it's really powerful. It's about education. So I want to play that now. not the letter. Can't play a letter yet. Stay tuned. Technology.
It's coming.
Every
That's
day.
right. It's coming.
But Beth and Sarah talked about this on their podcast, and they talked about the letter they received. So I want to play that real quick. I think it's really, really powerful.
On Sunday night, Chad and I attended the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center Upstander Awards in Cincinnati, Ohio. These awards recognize people using their strengths to stand up for themselves and others. Hundreds of people were nominated. I got to meet and learn about some of them, and it is an absolutely incredible group of people out doing the kind of work that makes you smile and cry and feel a sense of humility and awe and unshakable hope. And because of the caliber of people who were nominated and chosen as finalists, I was absolutely shocked when Sarah and I received the Upstander Regional Erwin Hurley Award for Perspective. Erwin Hurley lived in northern Kentucky. He was deployed to Europe during World War II. And his son and his wife were there for the ceremony. And his son gave me a letter along with the award that Mr. Hurley had written to his wife, Marjorie, on May 16th, 1945. In that letter, Hurley, who did many things to stand up for justice and equality and humanity during his career, wrote about what he saw at Dachau, one of the largest concentration camps in Germany. He wrote about the incredible cruelty he had seen firsthand. And even as he was watching and waiting for the war to end, he was looking around him and forward with a lot of insight and compassion. So I want to share this brief paragraph from the letter with you because I'll be thinking about it for a long time. He wrote, "The German people are completely conquered, of that I am most certain. But it's the young ones from 15 to 22 or 23 that we have to worry about. They never knew anything except Hitlerism. It is this group, even though aware of the horrors of Dachau, shrug their shoulders and shut their eyes to it, disregard it, or rather ignore it as if it didn't exist. They are the dangerous ones to the future of this nation. Ponder for a minute if you and I would have been reared in that atmosphere, never had the opportunity of knowing anything else, if we would have been any different. Maybe, I hope so, but not too sure." I will read this letter 100 times and keep it in my heart. I cannot tell you how honored and touched I was to receive this award on behalf of Pantsuit Politics. And when I say that, I mean not just for Sarah and me, or for Sarah and me and Elise and Maggie, but for all of us. Because everything that creates that Upstander Ripple Effect happens way beyond our audio files. It's the way you listen and reflect and discuss, and everything that you do in your families and communities. I wish I could put this gorgeous trophy and letter in the mail and send it on a little tour to every single one of you listening. Thank you to the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center for this tremendous honor and for all of the work that happens there. It is vital to our community.
Yeah, incredible, right?
Yeah. That gets sort of like right into my wheelhouse, thinking with sort of an empathetic mind, to sort of think like, it's easy to sit back and be judgmental of people, right?
Yep.
Without sort of putting yourself in their position and in their shoes. And I think about this a lot in terms of even what we were just talking about the way that we look at some of our young people or people who descend into violence. And it's sort of like, we're all sort of a product of what we know and what we see.
Yeah.
And if you don't know anything else and you don't see anything else, then you become that which surrounds you.
Yeah.
And I think we don't think about that enough when we are standing in judgment of other people. We're all the sum total of our experiences and the knowledge that we have. I can make certain choices that might be better choices than somebody else because I've got access to way more information. I might have access to more people. I might have access to more books and resources that other folks can't have. I can watch things on TV. Some people don't even have a TV. As crazy as that sounds, in 2024, there are people who exist in information vacuums where a lot of people don't have access to things that we take for granted, and we just assume that they do. Well, how could somebody not know? You know, I hear that a lot. How could somebody not know this or not be exposed to that? And you would be amazed, I say, by the number of kids who don't make it out of their neighborhood or don't make it out of their city to see other things and that we take for granted. And you would say, well, that's crazy. How could, you know, a kid from Cincinnati have never been to Dayton or, you know, even across the river to Newport or Covington? Yet those situations exist. And
I mean, and instead of saying there's inherently something wrong with this person, right? Instead of denying their humanity, just to have the humility in ourselves to say, wait a minute, exactly what Erwin wrote in that letter. I would like to think that I could do better, but probably not. You know, probably not. Like, so, but that's the transformative power of education. I think it starts with a level of humility, right? That like, if we're all grounded in the fact that our experiences, our categorizations about things, the way we perceive the world might be a product of where we're sitting and that we might not know it all. And there is access to education to help expose all of us to the things that are outside of our bubble. That's really what transforms. And, it's such a timeless piece of wisdom.
So you say everybody would like to say that they think that they would do better.
But
the reality is we probably wouldn't have, because if we can even look at in our discourse within this country, you talked about it stepping outside of the bubble. Most people won't do that. Even people who have access, they willingly stay inside of their own bubbles and won't venture out to get new information, or they refuse to see things beyond their own experience or even imagine that things could possibly be different than the reality that they know. And that is the same sort of mindset that we're sort of talking about here. It's easy to villainize it because we're talking about Hitler and Nazism, right? Like that's an easy target, but we don't often see it in ourselves that we won't venture outside of the knowledge base that we have to possibly conclude that we're not as smart as we think we are, that we don't know as much as we think that we know, and that there's that several different types of truths can exist in the same space based on individuals' experience. And, you know, that's why I've always said that I think the education system is probably one of the most important things that we have, and it is one of the great equalizers that we do have in our society. It doesn't overcome everything, but it does create a situation where you are able to overcome more. The more information that you have, the more educated that you are, the better decisions that you can make, and the more that you can change your destiny. And I think that why investment in that, more serious investment in that, if we really want to change the trajectory of our country and where our kids are at, like that has to be a bigger focus for us is really in digging in and making sure that we're really creating an informed, educated populace. That's, you know, that's the key.
I think, you know, when people want a quick fix and a Band-Aid, and education is it's the long game.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like the things that we're doing now will show returns and benefits in our society in a generation, in 10 years. I mean, we might not see it tomorrow. So I think that's the other problem, is that people want like some kind of quick fix to this. And the reality is that this is going to require changing the way we think about how people consume information and access to information, and, you know, and critical understanding of history. Like, you know, looking at it not as some removed, detached list of facts that we have to memorize, but as an exploration of humanity.
For sure.
And what are the lessons we draw from that help us think about the times we're living in and what we're doing? So
you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. And if you just take an excerpt out of that clip, Mr. Hurley talked about in his letter, what we need to be concerned about is this group, this young group right now.
Yeah.
And where are we going to be in where are they going to be in 10, 15 years? Because where they are, what they know, and how they see the world is what's going to have the greatest impact, not just on them, but on all of us who might be around in 10 or 15 years. So as we look at our country, we've got to say, look, we got to look at our generation of kids and where they are now, because these are the future people who are going to be running our country. And if we're concerned about where this generation is now, if you really say you're concerned about America, and everybody's talking about this November election and the ramifications of what that's going to have on the country. What really is going to have ramifications on our country is how we're preparing this generation for 10 or 15 years now, where, many of us are going to be maybe collecting Social Security, who knows, by around that time, or
if there's any left.
Yeah, exactly.
In
fact, they may have some say in that, but making sure that we're investing in the education of this generation, and that we're creating a really group of smart. And I think that's one of the things that also kind of bugs me, and I know we got to get ready to get into
what you're saying
discussion.
I think is a good segue, because keep going.
One of the things that really kind of frustrates me is that this notion of, intelligence used to be something that we aspired to in this country, and now intelligence is being couched as some sort of coastal elitism in our politics that doesn't speak to the common person. And I'm just like, where did that come from?
It's like a race to the bottom.
Becoming educated, when did being an educated person become a negative or a dirty thing, or something that we should not be proud of? Like that information, intelligence, education was something that we used to aspire to as a country, and now it's sort of like we're talking about the low information voters and people without college degrees and all of these things. And I'm not even suggesting that education has to equate to a college degree. I'm just saying developing a knowledge base. The value of trying
learning.
to educate. Exactly. And I think that we've got to change the conversation around that in that country, because that is in our country, because that is so self-defeating. I don't understand.
Incentivize learning and curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Museums are a good way to do that. Just saying it, just putting it out there. Anyway, today we're featuring a story from the archives about an amazing human being by the name of Werner Coppel. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he had this incredible life. He described it as two lives, actually. He described it as, his quote is, "I arrived in Union Terminal with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase. And that ended the first part of my life." What had come before was, at 19 years old, he was forced on a death march out of Auschwitz, where he had been imprisoned, and miraculously he escaped. He survived the war, and he rebuilt his life with his wife and his baby and his suitcase in Cincinnati. He met his moment, so to speak, when he read something. Actually, it was a paid insert in the Inquirer. And he knew he had to speak. And I was thinking about the person who's quoted in this paid insert, who said this really hateful thing that he wanted to speak up against. This person was, I'm not sure, I don't think they were in Germany necessarily, but this was a generation.
Yes.
Growing up with German heritage, coming out of World War II, and these were the ideas, right? This was the sensibility at the time in that, among some in that community.
Right.
And so as Werner read this, he said, this can't stand. And up until then, no one had spoken out publicly about their experiences in the Holocaust. He was the first survivor in Cincinnati to do that. So when we talk about upstanders, my gosh, it's like hard to imagine an upstander story that is more foundational to our work at the center than what Werner did courageously and heroically, and the fact that he chose how he wanted to respond to this in a way that didn't become what he was speaking out against, and in a way that leaned into education is really special. So Yeah. So we've got the story from the archives. And I joined Corey Silvernagel, our director of collections and exhibitions, to take a look inside at some really special pieces about Werner's story. So we'll share that now. Hey, so we are here in the archives of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. This is not something that's open to the public. It's behind many closed doors for safekeeping. And we are here with our incredible curator, Corey Silvernagel, who really takes incredible professional, but also you have a personal passion for this work, caring for our amazing collection, which includes documents, firsthand, real documents that our survivors brought with them and others, and also some artifacts that sort of illuminate these stories as well.
Yeah, so our collections document the stories of Holocaust survivors, other eyewitnesses like American soldiers and liberators, rescuers. Each one of their stories is different, and the things that they saved is so different. So today I want to share with you some of Werner Coppel's collection.
Yeah.
Werner was someone who was very close to our center because sharing his story was really important. So
He was like a pioneer in doing it.
absolutely, yeah.
Walk us through a little bit of what you have in these, but I need to put my gloves on.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
we are very careful.
If you want to touch anything,
That's
wear
right.
your gloves.
To make sure that we are not...
So the first things I want to show you today are two photographs of Werner. I want to give you kind of a face to this story. So this is Werner Coppel. He was born in Moers, Germany. He was a survivor of Auschwitz. So both of these photographs were taken very shortly after the war. After the war, he didn't return to Moers to stay. He went to Berlin. So this is his personal identification card.
This would have been after the war that this photo was taken.
Yep. So this was issued on May 3rd, 1946. And we can learn a lot about Werner from this card. We learn that he was born in 1925, his hometown, first name, last name, even his fingerprint is there.
Wow.
And then another photograph of
So the
him.
German government post-war issued these for anyone or for people who were... at
Yeah,
that
so
point?
he was German, but he was also stateless, right?
yeah.
So this document would have been probably one of the first identification documents that was issued to him. This isn't his passport. This is just his national identification card.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And this portrait of him, which was also taken after the war. This is featured prominently in our Points of Light theater.
It is.
And if you have not been down to the museum, you need to come because we have an amazing
Yeah.
film that talks about Werner and his story and the activation of his strengths in that story. And this image sticks in my mind from that film.
Yeah, so Werner's story is one of the stories that's throughout the entire museum. So we start the museum experience sharing his story in the lobby, and then it continues throughout. Werner's a great example of just one person who I think found a moment to speak up. And that's what that film is about.
Yeah, powerfully.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share
Wow.
over here. We kind of continue revealing Werner's story through the archives. So this is an affidavit that was issued by Sam Funk
Yep.
in 1948.
Living in Avondale at the time.
Yep. So he's living in Avondale, but he owns a farm in New Richmond in Claremont County.
Yep.
This is an affidavit that really, in many ways afforded Werner and his family their American visas to immigrate.
Wow.
So Sam Funk is sponsoring Werner, noting that he's going to give Werner employment, that he won't, be a burden on American society.
Yeah. And you had to have that in order to immigrate as a refugee,
Yeah,
right? You had to be able
one
to...
of many documents, yeah. So this document notes, Werner's name. It includes his wife, and he had a son that he came with,
Ron.
Werner and Trudy, his wife, had two sons, Ron and Steve. Ron was just a baby when they arrived here, and then Steve was born in Cincinnati.
And that's his quote. I arrived in Cincinnati with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There was the baby.
Yep.
Wow.
Then, kind of continuing the story, we have his public school certificate of citizenship classes. So Werner and all of the new immigrants arriving to Cincinnati or elsewhere, whether they were coming from Germany or somewhere else, they wanted to become American citizens. So many people took night classes to learn English. They took citizenship classes to, learn a variety of things. And Cincinnati Public Schools facilitated that in our community.
At the time.
So this is Werner's certificate. We also have Trudy's in
I was going to say, and I think Trudy's is the one actually that's in the stairwell, right? On the way down to the museum.
Yeah.
So again, you come to the museum and you can see this, in large print, the facsimile of it, proudly sort of on the wall there, down the stairs as you come into the museum. I was assumed that Werner had one obviously as well, but I've never seen it. Yeah. I've never seen it.
So this was issued in 1954. They gained citizenship shortly after. Werner was part of New Hope Synagogue in Cincinnati. He was connected to the Jewish community here. And he was someone who I think he shared his story, but not very publicly for a long time. So the next thing I will show you is this article. This, you can learn much more about this in the museum, but this is the article that inspired it inspired Werner to speak out. So one day he opens the Cincinnati Enquirer, and he sees in the insert inside of the newspaper an article, German Americans' Pride versus Politics. And in it, Eugene von Reistenberg, who is at the time the president of the German American Citizens League of Cincinnati, he is quoted in this article saying that the Diary of Anne Frank is a fake.
Yep.
I mean, he survived a death march out of Auschwitz, and this was outrageous, this Holocaust denial that he experienced.
Is this the piece he kept? This was a copy of that article that he kept.
Yeah, so this is a copy of what he kept to us, what he kept and donated to us.
And you can see he even marked these are his markings there, where that piece.
Yep.
I actually can't imagine what that was like to read that after what he'd been through, and to think just all of the things that went through his mind about how he should respond. But we know how the story played out and how he ended up responding, right? Which was to speak his truth, the truth about what had happened, and that started this wave of survivors and others having, the inspiration and the courage to speak out publicly as well.
Yeah, I think,
wow.
Werner, again, is just an example of one person who, found a way to react, and he found a way to, write the good history instead of to, continue to play into this general Holocaust denial and to be silent and to ignore it. He wanted to let people know that the Holocaust certainly did happen. Because he was there and he experienced it. Yeah.
And I think about the need, we would like to think that this whole trend of Holocaust denial, revisionism, etc., that's a crazy thing that happened back then and it's not around anymore. Unfortunately, we know that there's a growing school of that. And I think about Werner and his choice to speak and his courage as sort of a grounding. I mean, I know for all of us, it's a grounding piece of the work that we do every day, right? It's in a moment of continued, proliferation of hate and antisemitism and Holocaust denial, remembering how he chose to respond to that by educating and by illuminating is really powerful, and I think it's instructive for all of us as we keep doing the work. So,
and Werner's just one act which then, again, is this ripple effect that carries through the rest of his life of continuing to speak and speak and speak more and more. It reminds me doing that work that, we can have soft voices, but make a huge impact.
Oh, I love that. It is so true. And I talk about this sometimes in the Humanity Gallery as I'm leading tours, but it's the same thing here. Werner didn't wake up one day and say, oh, I envision this future with an archives like this and, a museum that educates. He said, I need to respond to this. I need to figure out how to act. This has activated me in a way that calls me to meet this moment. And he did. And to your point, the ripple of that, right? That became this and that became this, and other survivors were inspired to speak. And he found sort of this, rhythm of education that he carried with him throughout the rest of his life. And here we are today because of it. So really special. And there's one other piece that I want to see here.
Sure. So there's one other item I pulled out from Werner's collection that is really, really special. We don't exhibit it often in the museum because it's in very poor condition. But this is a Haggadah that is used during Passover Seder. This Haggadah was buried in Berlin during the war. It wasn't buried by Werner, by someone else. But after the war, when Werner was in Berlin, he and others unearthed these items, which included Judaica, prayer books, and this Haggadah was part of that.
Wow.
So it was used in one of the first Seders after the war, and he brought it with him here to Cincinnati. So, Werner's connection to Judaism, his connection to his culture, to his family, his tradition, I think was really important to him. And I'm certain that must have kind of called him to speak.
Informed his activism in that moment. Yeah. And his telling of his story. This, I was getting choked up just listening, looking at this. And being so close to it, something that survived, right? Such a catastrophic chapter of history. And I just think about the amazing survival and perseverance of the Jewish tradition and the fact that you could look back over chapters of Jewish history for thousands and thousands of years, and whether they're collapsible menorahs, that were hidden during... I think it was actually during the Inquisition. I saw one in a museum at one of the synagogues, the Moorish synagogues in the South, to something like this that, Jews at the time knew that there were going to be other Jews who would need this. They had the forethought and the hope and the audacity to know that this wasn't going to be the end of the Jewish story and that there would be Jews who would need this. And they kept it, and they saved it, and they hid it. And the fact that it was found and it continues today is just really powerful.
Yeah. And, because it was brought here to Cincinnati, I think it also gives way to this idea that, the Holocaust is international history, right? It's global. European history, global history, But it's our local history, too. And this Haggadah also has a story here, that part of its story continues here, and it continues today.
Yeah. Do you know if he ever used it after he found it, or I'm sure he wanted to keep it?
Yes. So I know that it was used, in that first Seder, but I don't know how often it was used after the war. It'd be an interesting question to ask Steve or Ron if they remember having this in their home growing up, or...
Yeah, and the story of the Haggadah, for those who don't know the Passover story, is all about liberation, right? The whole thing is about a journey to freedom and, having a piece that survived its own chapter of liberation, its own chapter of... that is really, really amazing. Wow. Yeah. Well... People will get a sneak peek of something that we don't often put in the museum because, again, it's so fragile. You can tell just by looking at it. It's
Yeah. It's a treasure, though. It's really, everything in our archives tells a really important story, but this is a story that, we have to be sharing and we can't forget.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing with me. So there's one other piece that I know you want to show folks, and I can't wait for people to see because it's just so special.
Yeah, so this is another piece in our collection that we don't often share in the museum, but it's amazing. It has an amazing story. So this is the suitcase that Werner and Trudy packed all of their belongings in and traveled to Cincinnati with.
Wow.
So Werner, when I used to hear Werner speak, he spoke to students as long as he could. When Werner would share his story, he would always begin by saying, I arrived in Union Terminal with a wife, a baby, and a suitcase. And he would say, that began the second part of my life. Now let me go back and tell you about what happened before. So this suitcase is that suitcase that he would talk about. It's really special. It includes handwritten on it his name, Cincinnati, where they will arrive to. So as Werner and Trudy and Ron traveled on a ship to the United States, arrived in New York Harbor, this suitcase also did. The suitcase went on the journey too.
Wow. And so he had this suitcase, and you said one other with it, and that was everything that they brought.
Yeah,
with
as
them.
far as I know. So he also brought with him a wicker trunk that contained things also.
Wow.
Werner was the only survivor of his family, though. He didn't have many things or people around him after the war. So he began his rebuilding in Germany, and the rebuilding continued here. So
the Haggadah was one of the things that was in this suitcase, or possibly with him on his person as he arrived. I mean, just for scale, like, it's shorter than I am tall. And I just, some of us think about, a long trip to Europe or something, and they would pack this much, and this and one other suitcase about the same size contained everything that that Werner and his family had with them to start their second chapter of their life here in Cincinnati. It's so powerful, and you can see even the handles, the leather handles on the side. The one over here I think is broken. It's amazing. So this would have come, I guess, through freight, right? If he was coming off the train, everything came into, as you said, into New York Harbor.
Yeah.
And then he and his family would have taken the train and come through Union Terminal.
Probably, yeah. So, at some point, this, again, it made the journey as his family did. Wow. Artifacts like this have so much power to tell amazing, deep stories that people might not otherwise ever know about.
Yeah.
So every chance I get, I try to share Werner's suitcase.
I was going to say, where do you share it? I mean, do we have opportunities to put this out or to show kids, as in different educational settings?
Yeah, so we recently, it was recently exhibited 2 years ago now in the Jewish Bicentennial exhibit as the city, celebrated this huge Jewish history here. This suitcase, along with others, were shared to, represent all of these people that richly contributed to our city.
New Americans.
At the
time.
So they were shared to symbolize this rebuilding. And Werner's story is certainly so interwoven into the fabric of that narrative. We also recently shared the suitcase with teachers at our Kaltman Institute, to help teachers also find creative ways to storytell, to help their students make connections, and to find their own connection to these people who, may seem very old to them, very far away. But it's not far away.
This is
it's
right here. I mean, you can.
Yeah.
Can I touch it?
Absolutely.
With my gloves on.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you can see it even in the back how the fabric, it looks
Yeah.
like it's wrapped in fabric and kind of painted.
Yeah, so there's some parts that are really fragile on it.
Oh, and it's writing on the back too. I didn't even see that. The same with the address, which would have been where it was headed. Mm-hmm. Can't even imagine. And he'd never. We take for granted, the people coming and going these days, right? It's like easy to hop a plane or whatever, or get on a train. But in these days, this was a whole new world. I mean, he'd never been outside. Had he ever been outside Europe before the war?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So just the courage. I can't even imagine the courage it took to, and to have your child with you and your wife with you, and to feel like you were pioneering this new
and responsible to take care of your family.
Yeah, really. And to think about the Coppel family now, right? They have generations of Coppels who are here and part of our community, and our neighbors and friends, and on our board, and it's
and I would argue, I mean, even the this courage and the bravery that Werner had is been passed down to his children for sure. In the way Steve and Ron both share their family stories, that legacy of standing up and speaking out continues.
So many thoughts just watching that video, just how powerful it is, and first of all, just from a historical standpoint, the power and the impact of artifacts, right? And just being able to have those things that connect you to a period of time, and to be able to see it and touch it, and to see how the effects that time has had on it, and almost kind of try to transport yourself back mentally in your mind, to those times. And, I was thinking about, if I were a kid coming through the museum and with my modern day sensibilities and looking at, Werner's suitcase, I'd be like, well, it's just a suitcase, what's the big deal about, deal about a suitcase. But when you think about what that suitcase represents, not just that everything that he had, he was bringing in that suitcase with him to sort of start a new life, but it is also representative of everything that he had lost and was leaving behind as well. Because if we think about, I was thinking about, man, if I'm traveling or I'm moving to someplace, I got to get a moving truck. I got all of this stuff that I'm taking with me to wherever I'm going. And then the notion of that everything that you have, you've compacted into this suitcase that you're taking with you to start over. And that's not only a symbol of of everything that you have, but what have you lost, and what are you leaving behind? It's like, and when you start to think about things like that, it really does help you wrap your mind around the gravity of why Werner felt that he had to respond to that article that he read, without thinking about all of that. One might say, in these days and times where there's so much misinformation that's out there, it's easy to kind of say, I'm not going to try to respond to every crazy thing that I see on social media or in the internet or that sort of thing. We kind of slough a lot of that off as just crazy talk, or, nobody's really going to believe that, although we know that that's not necessarily true. Like, people believe a lot of misinformation, but back in these days and these times, for someone who went through the experience of the Holocaust and lost so much, it's easy to understand how he just could not abide someone saying that didn't happen, and feeling compelled, absolutely, to have to say something and not just sit on that. And I think, the great thing about the history and the archives and seeing that, it really kind of helps you understand a little bit more of the mentality that drives somebody like Werner to say, I'm not gonna allow that.
And to speak for obviously what he had been through, but on behalf of the 6 million people who aren't here to tell what happened to them. That's, I think, and I know that's the responsibility that so many survivors and their descendants feel, right?
Yeah.
And, we can relate to that in any marginalized community and identity. It's like, you're not just speaking for you. You're speaking on behalf of an entire people, and certainly those who aren't here
For sure.
to speak for themselves. So it is a remarkable story of upstanding, and it really grounds us. We have a great conversation in our video series, Hear My Story, on YouTube, which there are links to in the notes. Conversation with Brad and Steve. So Steve Coppel, Werner's son, and then Steve's son, Brad, got together and talked about his legacy and this moment of upstanding and beyond. And so you'll definitely, if you want to hear more about Werner's story and hear from his son and his grandson, you should check that out as well.
And I think don't underestimate, too, what it must have taken for Werner to tell his story. So here, again, this is just how my mind works and how I think. Here is a man who's sharing the most traumatic experience of his life. And if anybody's ever endured a trauma, think about how difficult that is. Most people don't want to relive that, let alone tell that story. Like you don't want to think about it. You don't want to have those memories, let alone feel the need to have to come out and experience that pain and tell it to offset, just sort of a nasty, vicious lie or untruth. And so let's not underestimate,
totally agree.
what it took to have to revisit, as you've rebuilt, and
you're just trying. I mean, so I think there was this common, so understandable idea that I just want to fit in. Yeah. I don't want to be different. I want to be American. Mm-hmm. I want to learn the language. I want to, it's like this otherness had created such hardship and had been associated with so much trauma that I think so many of the survivors just wanted to, I'm just like everyone else, and it was tapping into that vulnerability and the deep trauma and sadness, and having to relive that, but it was also having to actually kind of say, I'm different. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, in a way that had, because of the hatred of other people, had caused such terrible loss in my life and trauma. And so, yes, I think courage is an understatement, and strength, certainly strength and stamina. But look at what it inspired.
The ripple effect is just so profound by that, and not in only what he encouraged, other survivors to come out and share their stories, but what that eventually became, and even the reason why you and I are here now, even having this conversation.
That's right.
Again, it just goes to show the power of the ripple effect and how standing up in one moment, doing one seemingly small thing, can have huge impacts that benefit a whole lot of people. And I think we're all better today because of what Werner did, all of those years ago, and just standing up and saying, you know what, I ain't gonna let that. I'm not gonna let that slide.
Go unanswered. Yeah.
And sometimes, on my end at the Inquirer, I get a hard time. Particularly around issues of race, people say, Kevin, you've always got something to say. Some readers, you're always writing about race. Why can't you just let it go? Why do you have to say every time there's something? Why do you have to say something? I think Werner is a perfect example of why you have to do that, because it can be annoying. It can get on people's nerves, but it's necessary sometimes to call things out for what they are and to say, you know what, I'm not going to let that stand.
Yeah. So well said. And so, we had another Upstander this month, another Upstander story we wanted to feature, which is really a name that many people are familiar with.
Yes.
Debra Messing, who is an award-winning actress and actually was our celebrity host at our Upstander Awards, the biggest event of our year. As we've talked about, we spend that whole evening celebrating Upstanders. We also, I was so privileged to be able to have a conversation with her. And she joined us that night to honor this community of Upstanders here in Cincinnati and to share a little bit more about her life and her work and her advocacy for human rights. So I want to talk a little bit more about your upstanding work, your sort of role as an upstander. You've been an advocate for so many causes, for, of course, the Human Rights Campaign and the LGBTQ sort of community and issues, but also the global fight against HIV and AIDS as global ambassador for PSI, visiting prevention programs in several African countries, even testifying before Congress to help secure $100 million in aid for that work. And now you've really become an upstander. I would say actually continued to be, but sort of moved into the front of your advocacy against antisemitism. Can you talk a little bit about your work on this issue today and sort of what compelled you to center that in your advocacy?
Charlottesville was the pivotal moment for me. When I saw people with tiki torches walking and saying, "Jews will not replace us," it was so chilling and so terrifying that I felt like, okay, I have to get involved now. I think growing up, every day my parents spoke to me about the Holocaust. Their conversations were, you have to have more than 3 children so that we could replenish the people lost in the Holocaust. But I think what happened was, because the Holocaust was so unimaginable, that I think my generation felt like it was almost a promise that it would never happen again. That we would be educated about it, but it wouldn't happen. And I think October 7th was when I was ignited into action.
So you've really used your platform to raise awareness about Holocaust education, to combat not just anti-Semitism, but really the rampant hate that is unchecked in online spaces. And you've been doing more and more with organizations like ours, Holocaust museums and organizations. And now you're producing a documentary on anti-Semitism, sort of what we've seen in particular in the United States since October 7th. Why is Holocaust history, in your mind, so important right now?
Education is everything.
Yeah.
Facts matter. And I think our educational system has failed us. I believe the number is 65% of schools in America actually teach the Holocaust at all, and that's unacceptable. When I heard that kids today, when you say the word Auschwitz, most of them don't know what that word is, it just became so clear to me that Holocaust education is everything. And we need places like this in every single town.
You can clap for that.
We do. Because for some reason, the Jews as a people are segregated from every other kind of racism and hatred in all of humanity. And it's always been that way. And it may not fix the problem, but it will educate people so that they're not ignorant. And as long as people have the facts, and today that is a very, very challenging thing to accomplish because of all the propaganda and all of the lies and all the denialism, I feel like that is our most urgent call to action, is to educate about the Holocaust.
It was a pretty impactful evening all around, and you know, she's been a really strong voice in this space. It was really interesting to hear her talk about what ignited that. In some ways, actually, it's the same story, isn't it? It's like, I heard them saying that, and I just couldn't let it be.
Right.
Werner, the same thing.
Yeah. You know, I think it goes back to, and I love the thread that's kind of gone through this whole podcast from the beginning, because we sort of started talking about national observances and the intentionality of making sure that we maintain freedoms and so forth and so on. And the thing that spoke to me about her was sort of being jolted into action.
Yep.
And there's this sense that I think we've all got to recognize that it shouldn't take, or we can't allow it to necessarily take, for tiki torches and marches or an October 7th to propel us into activity. We got to do more preventive maintenance as opposed to reactionary responses. And so I think, and it's human nature. I mean, I think it's, you know, part of it is we all have to be kind of shaken out of our comfort or complacency into moving into action. But I think, you know, we all need to develop a sense of, and I get it, it's exhausting. You know, we're all looking for an opportunity for respite and, you know, where's my day off kind of attitude. But the reality is that when we take days off, the tiki torch holders, they're not taking days off. They're continuing to mobilize and, you know, kind of try to affect strategies to roll us back. And so, we do have to be vigilant, but that was just something that I thought about as I heard her talk about, you know, just sort of that spark. That's great, and we need more folks like Debra and others to sort of step up and use their platforms and their voices. But boy, we got to get to a place where it doesn't take you know, just unconscionable or outrageous events that to spark us into that type of activism.
Yeah, and I gotta say, you know, she's been really actually unique. You know, you look at Hollywood. And there are few people, relatively few people speaking. She is one of few, and so I give her, you know, a lot of credit, as you do, to, you know, for stepping in that moment when others have stayed silent. Yeah,
well, she kind of talked about that, you know, in her remarks that night, that you know, there are some people who just aren't willing to risk what potentially comes along with lending your voice. That people are protecting, you know, very self-interested and protecting what they have going for them, and they're not willing to step out on the platforms and show the courage that she has shown to stand on these sort of issues. And you know, I mean, we even see that here in our community. A lot of the silence that, you know, we see around a lot of issues in this community is people are not willing to risk
fear. It's fear. Fear of retribution.
I mean, and there is that. I mean, you know, we live in a time where people are going to come after you if you take a stance in a particular situation that they don't like, and a lot of people are just not willing to risk that. You have to be able to, at the end of the day, look at yourself in the mirror, and absolutely. And I think that she can do that. So it was such a privilege to have her in conversation. Really, awesome to have her in Cincinnati. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we have probably used up more than enough of our time.
I was going to say, if you're still with us, amazing, kudos, congratulations. Come back next time. Leave your reviews and ratings for us. We want to be able to incorporate those and be in conversation around some things you're thinking about and as you're listening. And you can also listen to the full interviews with Werner Coppel's descendants, his son and his grandson, and with Debra Messing on our Hear My Story series, which is on YouTube. So you'll find the links to those in the show notes. And it's just been fun. We'll do it again in a month.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And I sincerely hope that we will hear from our listeners and let us know what we can do better, what you want to hear more of, and all of that will contribute to making this a really great experience, I think, for everybody who wants to be a part of the Upstander Ripple Effect.
Truly, there's room for all of us.
That's right.
All right, we'll see you next time. Let us know your thoughts on this episode. Our email is in the show notes. You can listen anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or visit holocaustandhumanity.org/podcast. You can also connect with us on Instagram and TikTok at Holocaust and Humanity, and X and Facebook at CincyHHC. The Upstander Ripple Effect is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This series is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online anytime at holocaustandhumanity.org. Managing producer is Ann Thompson. Consulting producer is Joyce Kamen. Technical producer is Robert Mills, and technical director is Josh Emerson. The opening sequence is by Ken Furman. Archive videography by Michael Holder. Select music is by Kick Lee, and this is recorded at Technical Consulting Partners Studios in Cincinnati, Ohio.